Good evening. Between Stage 2 and Electron's kick stage, preceded of course by the shutdown of the Rutherford engine for SECO, or second engine cutoff. The Rutherford engine on the second stage will throttle down before shutting off completely to allow for clean separation of the stages. From there, the kick stage will enter a coasting phase around the Earth before we light it up for
Craft exactly where it needs to be, exactly when it needs to be. So customers can build their constellations quickly with us and also very accurately.
If they're wanting to build up a constellation from scratch, a lot of customers have an orbital plane requirement. So with target right ascension of the ascending node or longitude of the ascending node. So for any satellite or sets of satellites, we can get the spacing between them exactly how the customer wants.
Well, people care about dedicated because time is money. And deploying the constellation to exactly where it needs to be, over the area where the density of population or the density of services is super important. I think a lot of people think just space is space, but it absolutely is not. Every satellite has a postcode, if you will. Every satellite has a place that it is ideally suited to be to provide the best service to everybody.
You can imagine that would be talking within kilometres, tens of kilometres when we're talking accuracy. When customers come with us, usually they request on apogee and perigee plus minus 15 kilometres and on inclination plus minus 0.15 degrees. What Electron usually achieves is actually within a couple of kilometres on the apogee and perigee, and on the inclination we're accurate to usually the second decimal place. Our best to date was for flight 50. On the apogee we were 8 metres, the perigee 3 metres, and the inclination was plus minus 0 degrees.
We are looking forward to launching more satellites for more constellation customers as the year progresses. Otherwise, a check-in on the clock, and we are now at T-minus 3 minutes, 49 seconds and counting to launch with Electron. So in just a few moments, the countdown will be covered by the rocket's onboard flight computer from T-minus 2 minutes. And then final checks are completed autonomously by Electron as it prepares for liftoff, though it will continue to receive liquid oxygen into its propellant tanks up until about T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds. We'll know that's been completed when we hear a call out from the mission control operator that the LOX system is in recirculation. After that, we should hear the call out that the rocket's first and second stages are fully pressurised for launch. And this happens around 30 seconds or so after LOX loading is complete. Then it's over to the 10-second countdown by our launch director, with Electron's Rutherford engines on the first stage set to ignite at T-minus 3 seconds. It's time to bring up the mission control audio channels now to hear our operators call outs live as they happen. So we'll be back with you after liftoff.
Lock the auto sequence and confirm.
Locked.
Then we can please confirm all flight computer ASCOs are green.
All ASCOs are green.
To all operators, we are go for auto sequence start at T-minus 2 minutes. LDs go for launch.
Vehicle is fully on internal power. FTS is green and enabled for flight.
Lock slot is complete. System is in recirculation. Anti-geysering is disabled.
Stage 1 and Stage 2 tanks are pressed for flight.
High flow engine purge enabled.
T-minus 20 seconds and counting. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Electron has connected that second ground systems.
Beginning pitch over.
Stage 1 propulsion nominal.
There goes our Electron rocket with a clean liftoff from LC1, now on its way to space for the 68th time. And we are steadily climbing in speed and altitude as Electron comes up to max Q, or maximum aerodynamic pressure. It's one of the first milestones the rocket has to pass through to get to low Earth orbit, and we're standing by for it now.
Approaching max Q. Cleared max Q.
All right, we are clear through max Q there as Electron continues on to space, and everything is looking nominal across the rocket's speed and altitude. Now that we're past max Q, the next milestones coming up are main engine cutoff on the booster and stage separation. So very soon we can expect to see all 9 Rutherford engines on the first stage power down and shut off in preparation for what comes next. Just a couple of seconds after MECO, the first and second stages will separate to lose the dead weight of the first stage. And then the second stage Rutherford engine will ignite and power up to propel the second stage onward to orbit. And those events are now coming up very shortly.
Stage 1 propulsion holding nominal. Stand by for MECO in approximately 30 seconds.
"15 seconds till staging."
Engine burnout detect mode.
MECO confirmed.
Stage separation confirmed.
That was the sound of an electric pump-fed rocket engine in space. How cool. Thank you to our flight software team for that one. And a beautiful and clean second stage engine startup for Electron. Nice and bright on your screen there. Electron's altitude is now more than 100 kilometers an hour, coming up quickly to the Kármán line as we hit more than 8,000 kilometers an hour on the speed dial. Everything is going great so far with Electron. With MECO and stage separation cleared, next will be fairing jettison when Electron's nose cone separates and falls away. We might not see it at night, but we should hear it called out in mission control, so let's listen in.
Fairing jettison confirmed.
Nicely done. That's fairing separation confirmed across the nets as Electron continues on nominally. We are now at 130 kilometres in altitude and travelling more than 9,000 kilometres an hour. All is on track with the mission, with another 5 or so minutes to go of engine burn time for the second stage.
Guidance is looking good so far with the second stage. The plot lines for our planned and actual trajectory are closely matched on the right-hand side of your screen there, which is exactly what we want to see. And now that we are at T plus 4 minutes, 36 seconds into stage 2 flight, we have got just over 4.5 minutes left of engine burn time before we reach SECO and stage separation.
Well, coming up next for the second stage will be battery hot swap for that Rutherford engine. So every one of these engines uses an electric pump-fed cycle for its propulsion, with batteries used to power its electric motor. But the length of the engine burn time on stage 2 means that the battery pack it starts with will run dry before the engine is due for shutdown. So, Electron performs a manoeuvre called the battery hot swap, and that swaps in a fresh pack of batteries to keep the engine running for full duration. When that happens, you should see the first set of battery packs eject from the second stage and fall away, so let's watch out for that now.
HVB discharge holding nominal, approaching hot swap in roughly 30 seconds. Throttling down.
Battery jettison confirmed.
Excellent call out there, and a clean battery hot swap on the second stage. The Rutherford is continuing to power the mission on past 198 kilometres in altitude at speeds of more than 1,600 kilometres an hour, coming up close to the orbital insertion speed for final stage separation in just a few minutes.
AFTS is saved.
All right, well, that glowing nozzle you can see on your screen is our stage 2 engine, our vacuum optimized Rutherford engine, powering Electron and its payload, now past 201 kilometres in altitude and 19,000 kilometres an hour. Okay, we are just moments away from the final stage separation between Stage 2 and Electron's kick stage, preceded, of course, by the shutdown of the Rutherford engine for SECO, or second engine cutoff. The Rutherford engine on the second stage will throttle down before shutting off completely to allow for clean separation of the stages.
From there, the kick stage will enter a coasting phase around the Earth before we light it up for payload deployment within the hour. But first, let's listen in for that SECO and stage separation call out from Mission Control.
SECO confirmed.
Stage separation confirmed.
And that is SECO confirmed by Mission Control, along with the kick stage also confirmed to have separated into a nominal transfer orbit with its payload. Well done to everyone involved in the mission so far.
Well, from here, we have a bit of a wait until we rejoin the kick stage and its satellite on the opposite side of the planet after its elliptical coast of Earth. Once that happens, the kick stage should be in the prime position to perform a course correction burn that sets its trajectory to a circular orbit for payload deployment.
Join us again then in about 40 minutes or so to see out the final moments of the mission. See you soon. Hello and welcome back as we head into the final few minutes of our Symphony in the Stars mission. We are preparing to deploy a single satellite to a 650-kilometre circular Earth orbit, and we are only a few moments away from that separation event on the kick stage.
We've otherwise had another nominal Electron launch this evening, lifting off from Launch Complex 1 at 7:08 p.m. local time. Now, after the kick stage was separated to its transfer orbit, we have been in a coast phase around Earth for the last 40 minutes or so. So up next is Curie engine ignition on the kick stage. Let's check in with Mission Control for the last few milestones.
Curie ignition confirmed.
There it is from Mission Control, successful Curie engine ignition. And so we heard from our GNC team earlier in the show about how Curie is responsible for our pinpoint payload deployment on orbit, within 10 metres of target sometimes, which in the expanse of space is incredible. Now, it's only small. It's no bigger than a coffee mug, like you can see here, but it is massively capable. And we can circularize orbits like we are doing today, but we can also perform orbital plane and inclination changes and leverage it to avoid tricky areas of solar radiation like the Van Allen belt.
It's also responsible for our re-entry missions with our Pioneer spacecraft. We've successfully executed 3 capsule re-entries, touching down once in Utah and twice in South Australia. Today is all about circularization though. The Curie will burn for just under 2 minutes total, rounding out our orbit to a 650-kilometre perigee and a 650-kilometre apogee. Shortly after the engine shuts down, we'll be ready for payload deployment and the separation system will initiate, delivering our customer satellite to their desired location.
Curie cutoff confirmed.
Nominal final orbit achieved.
There we go. Everything went smoothly for Curie startup and shutdown, and now we are just moments away from payload deployment for this mission. So let's listen into Mission Control to hear that final milestone for Electron.
Payload deployment confirmed.
Mission success confirmed with payload deployment complete by the kick stage. That is music to our ears for this Symphony in the Stars mission. Congratulations to our customer for tonight's mission and all the best with satellite commissioning in the days to come.
To the Electron team, congratulations on launch number 68. It won't be long before we're back on the pad for our next mission with Electron, so keep your eyes on our website and social media for updates on the next launch and any other RocketLab news. Otherwise, thanks again for joining us for another Electron launch. Until next time, this is RocketLab Mission Control signing off.